Hello! Another week rolls to an end, and I'm back with you guys. Why do I do this to myself?
It's good fun.
Week after week. Anyway,
Free alcohol.
that's true. Speaking of which, I am actually back. I must confess, I didn't manage.
You fell off the wagon.
I jumped off. I leapt off.
You had less than a week to go, my guy.
I just thought to myself, if you're not going to enjoy life, then it's not worth living, eh?
Mm.
Or just maybe you're just addicted to it.
No, it's in 3 weeks.
Yeah, and you relapsed. So
I wouldn't say he relapsed. He didn't meet his objective of 4 weeks. But that's
anyway.
Still very commendable. 3 weeks.
Well, thank you.
And I'll drink vicariously through you for another week, and I'll be back on the source, and there'll only be one teetotaler on the show.
Yeah.
Anyway, here we are, talking about things we shouldn't be talking about and that we know nothing about, but hopefully trying to change the world one conversation at a time. What are we drinking today? We'll start with you because, you're both boring.
No, I'm always interesting. He's usually boring.
Well, it's very interesting this week. A friend of the show, Muzi, decided to gift us with cinnamon apple spice celestial herbal tea. And it's great. It's got all the ingredients one would expect from something very,
Like it's got
spicy.
cinnamon and herbal
Yeah.
spices,
Yeah.
like it says on the box.
Yeah, it does. So I'm looking forward to it.
Great.
You haven't tried it? This is your first time?
Well, before the show I did try, and it was lovely. So I'm looking forward to enjoying it with you guys, with my buddies.
Yeah, fantastic.
He called us his buddies. What are you having?
Well, I'm carrying on the path of detoxing, and today I'm having a juice that's literally called Detox Shock.
Looks black.
Yes, it is black. It's got activated charcoal in it, and lemon, ginger, mint, and apple.
That you drink some with charcoal. Okay. Anyway.
Yep.
I was gonna make a whiskey cocktail, a hot toddy. I actually made one before the show.
What happened?
I had some, but also no, didn't agree with me too much. So I'm just gonna have J&B on ice, familiar favorite for me. My go-to whiskey, either on the rocks or with soda. Never disappoints.
It's also great value.
Yes, it is. You don't want to know how much you can get it for in this town now from certain illicit outlets. But we won't talk about that on this show. But I think we need to start the show on a bit of a sober note. The country lost one of its most famous economists this week, a man that tended to evoke very strong emotions in people. Some loved to love him, some loved to hate him. John Robertson. He passed away in his sleep earlier on in the week. I understand he'd been ill for a while. I know you, at the very least, were colleagues, but I think you were a bit of an admirer.
Yeah, I did. And lots of people actually became economists because of him. And I think that the thing that perhaps differentiated him from everyone is his strength of character and the things that he advocated for. I think in terms of private property, before you and I have been advocates of private property, he has been hammering private property as an issue for a very long time. And I think he stuck with that issue right through to his death. And I think that's something that we, should uphold. And I keep saying that he was a man of principle. So we've seen a lot of economists, or defunct economists, as Maynard Keynes would term them, who bend to the whims of politicians and policymakers. And he was not a guy who would do that. He's a guy who stuck to his guns and stuck to his principles. And I think that it's something to behold and to admire. and it will be sad. I think he leaves a very rich heritage, and I think that there's a lot that we could learn from him.
I didn't always agree with his worldview, but the more we make this show, the more I appreciate that we're a young nation. We're a nation that is forming itself in terms of philosophy and trying to find an identity. And I think people like John Robertson, love them or hate them, have played a very crucial part
In the conversation.
in the conversation and in the formation of our philosophy of who we are and our sense of identity. So, farewell, John Robertson. Elsewhere in the news this week, the global economy is in trouble. Growth forecast been revised downwards by the IMF. Everybody thinks inflation is up. US dollar inflation, we're now talking 7% or so. That number is probably going to go up more, and he's probably going to come up with some doomsday scenario where it turns to global hyperinflation. The sky is falling in China. There's low growth. The housing market is in crisis. South Africa is more relevant to us. South Africa's growth forecasts have also been cut. You're looking at maybe less than 2% this year. Are there any green shoots? Should we be sitting here drinking whiskey? Well, should I be drinking whiskey?
Well, no, you shouldn't be. You should have been for another week. But look, I there's a lot of doom and gloom, and in the news business, in the media business, they have this axiom that they live by: if it bleeds, it leads. So that's why the news is constantly dominated by negative and hysterical headlines. I don't think things are as bad as they're made out to be. So if you look at China, for example, they had 8% growth last year, which is quite impressive, in the context of the very strict COVID policies.
Coming off COVID.
But it's the world's second largest economy. So for them to do 8%, that's.
I think the worry was the last quarter where they did 4%.
Yeah,
annualized.
And you're being disingenuous. They had the hardest.
Impressive or not?
They had the hardest lockdown of anyone. They shut down the entire country. So for them to grow by 8% is not something to talk about. They were growing by 8% 10, 12 years ago. They were growing by 8% for a decade of successful years. So,
well, look, it's a $12, $13 trillion economy. So, whichever way you look at it, 8% is impressive. The fact that it's slower than in previous years and that it tapered in the last quarter, yes, it's cause for concern.
I think
but is it doom and gloom?
Well, I think this is the problem of living in Zimbabwe. I mean, when you hear people talk about 7% and 8%,
you think it's phenomenal?
You think it's phenomenal, So I think in the global context, I'll tell you why you'd be worried in Zimbabwe and why, to me, I don't see it as gloom and doom, right? I actually see it as reality. And this is the...
You didn't use the word correction.
Well, that's where I was going. It's just purely correction. So this is what we continuously, and I will, talk about Austrian economics here because we're trying to interpret the world events. And as Austrians, we don't see things as gloom and doom. What we see is a correction. That if something had been overheating, then you must go through a cooling effect.
But this is not part of the natural economic cycle. This is
it is.
This is induced by COVID.
I'll explain. They will say supply side constraints are unique. No, supply side constraints, that's actually business. That's actually what happens. That's actually part of the business cycle. So what the Austrians, the interpretation of business cycles as far as the Austrians are concerned is, so we've got a trajectory, a growth trajectory, whether it's China or the globe or even the US, a growth trajectory pre-COVID.
I thought you were going to say even Zimbabwe.
No, this is the real world. The real world. So there's a pre-COVID growth trajectory, and now we need to measure whatever recovery is happening against that pre-COVID And that's why we're worried. We're worried because we will never touch the pre-COVID growth trajectory for the next 10, 20 years.
Why? And how can you say never with such?
And I
high
think 20
conviction?
years is a very long.
Well, that's why it's called a business cycle, right? Because you're saying what happened, the decisions we made during COVID, and the growth that we need to meet. That's why you're saying that the growth is not hitting. So 4% is not enough. We need to be hitting for the next
15 or 20.
That's what we need
Is that
to do.
as Zim or globally?
No, globally.
Oh, Zim is like
Globally,
30%.
because- globally, because the growth trajectory, remember the world was growing at 3.5% anyway, pre-COVID, right? So post-COVID, you can't grow at 3.5.
Do you know what this year's forecast is from IMF?
4% globally.
No, they've reviewed it down, 3.8.
3.8. So you
Okay.
cannot.
So to replace 2 years missed of 3.5, you're the maths guy. You probably need a number around 4.2 or 4.5.
More than that. And you need that to be consistent for at least 5-10 years. And this is global, right? So that's why we're saying that, okay, so what happened during that period? Why, as Austrians, we call it a correction. We don't look at doom and gloom. We see it as a correction. It's because you pumped a lot of money during that period. And that's why you have supply side constraint. Because supply side constraints, it's because now when you need the recovery, the capacity you have is just not enough. When you look at the amount of money that's actually in the economy, the demand is there, but the supply just cannot catch up, right? And that's why we're saying that this will take a longer period to recover. It's how long does it take? And this is, I think, when we look at 2008, depending on the type of economist you are or the world view that you believe, we believe as Austrians that if you had not pumped in money, then the recovery would have been quicker. The correction happens quicker. But because you pumped in money, right now you have lots of people in the global world, not in Zimbabwe, who do not want to work. Lots of vacancies, empty.
The Great Resignation.
Exactly. People are. But why is it? It's because there's a lot of money that's there.
Okay.
So the correction just takes.
In all your gloom, commodity prices are at an all-time high.
I do not speak of gloom.
Okay, well, you know your reality or pragmatism or whatever you call it.
Correction.
In your sky is falling world, commodity prices
Chicken
are
Little World.
Correction. I call it a correction.
commodity prices are at an all-time high,
No, they're tapering off.
but they're very high. Gold
Right
at
now, the
1840,
So
1850.
the big worry, I'll tell you what the big worry with commodities and with markets right now, what the big worry is what the Fed is going to do. So the Fed has been operating at a 0% interest rate. And they've come out, and at least Joe Biden has come out and said inflation is a problem.
Was he awake?
Yeah, you just had a press conference. I know, it's unlike Trump, who was continuously having press conferences. But yeah, once in a while, Joe Biden actually comes out of the woodworks and says a thing or two. And what we learned is he's very supportive of a correction in terms of Fed. And what the Fed is going to do is increase interest rates. That's our big worry.
Why are you worried about high interest rates?
So we're
Don't they
worried.
encourage savings?
No, they do, but more investments. So we're worried about that correction.
So in whatever scenario, he thinks the sky is falling.
No,
Yeah, Chicken Little.
I believe in a correction. So what do you think is going to happen if you were borrowing at 0% and suddenly interest rates are now at 3%? What do you think is going to
A correction.
Exactly. There will be a correction.
So why are you unhappy about a correction?
So I'm not that happy. Those are not my words. Gloom, doom, doomsday, skies falling. Those are your words. To me, it's just an interpretation.
Viewer, please
of what-
rewind this 5 or 6 minutes and hear him use the phrase gloom and doom 5 or 6 times.
Not my words. To me, it's just purely a correction. So what we're saying is the Fed is now doing the right thing. They were not doing the right thing the last year, but now they're doing the right thing. And when they do the right thing, which is increase interest rates, there's a lot of people who are going to fall off the bandwagon. People won't be able to service the interest rates. Would
But
you agree with that?
isn't that okay? To quote Warren Buffett, when the tide goes out, you get to see who's swimming naked, right? So if there are businesses that had that are over leveraged, right, that could only afford to borrow when interest rates were at 0%, right? When they become normal, right? Whether you think normal is 2% or 4% or whatever it is, and they can't afford it, they go into bankruptcy. And the businesses that can actually afford it, that will actually run properly, then take over that space.
Acquire the market.
Absolutely, that's exactly. So that's the Austrian view.
So isn't that a good thing?
No, it is a good thing.
No, he doesn't believe in good or bad.
No. It is. The correction is a good thing, and you've correctly captured it. It is a good thing because there's certain businesses that should not survive, that should go out of business. But the problem, the world problem, is that actually reduces your growth rate. So that's why everybody is revising their growth rate, because when interest rates go up, your growth rate must come down, because there will be a lot of bankruptcies. There will be a lot of people who will miss their interest payments. We're already seeing it in China. So that's why why the world is worried, and you can see that the markets are worried, is because when interest rates go up, then growth must come down. But it's not doom, because what it actually presents is an opportunity to have the correction. Because when you have too much money, what tends to happen is you have malinvestments, right? No one wants to talk about
use no more
malinvestments.
language.
Okay,
Bad
bad investments.
Or stupid
Or
investments.
stupid investments. You tend to have stupid investments.
What
You
did you
tend
say?
to have
Look at the way he's dressed. The way he's dressed is the way he thinks, is the way he
Okay,
speaks.
we're not in a Harvard auditorium, okay?
Anyway, gents, shall we go for a quick break? We'll be back in a couple of minutes. You can see Rufaro is twitching already.
Yeah, I need to use the dictionary.
Welcome back. Just before we went away, Tinashe was painting a very dark picture of the future and
Not
trying
dark.
to convince us that it's not dark.
It's just a correction.
But okay, what does this correction mean for a little poor country called Zimbabwe?
The big problem is imported inflation. So if you have inflation in US dollar terms, 7%, even higher, the big problem for us is we are a dollar economy and lots of imports, right? So that impacts on us. The other issue is remittances. So you would expect, if there's lower growth, you'd expect lower remittances. We're lucky if it continues growing, but I think last year was a good year. I think $1.4 billion in remittances. I do not expect that to be in. The other issue is SDRs will not happen again this year. They happened last year, so that was a great bonanza.
I wish I hadn't asked you this question.
So I think that's
Typical. He's taking a very pessimistic view. I think everything he said is correct, by the way. But I think on a net basis, what he didn't say is going to move the needle, which is that we have sky high commodity prices. You saw Zimbabwe's report record numbers. You saw the platinum houses and a lot of the big gold mines indicate that they plan to significantly increase production this year to take advantage of these higher prices. So I think that the benefit to us in terms of higher export receipts from mining will likely outweigh the higher import bill because of imported inflation and mitigate the impact of lower remittance receipts. So I think from a Zimbabwean perspective, we're actually going to be better off
So maybe I could ask Rufaro a question. If you look at our imports, our oil imports, and the change in the price of oil, and you look at our exports, so look at platinum, look at gold, and look at the change in price this year, which one do you think you're going to see?
You're shifting the goalposts because we're
No.
talking broadly, right? We're talking inflation.
He was very specific. So because he's saying higher commodity prices, the high commodity prices happened in the last 2 years. Do you think that in the next year you're going to see even higher Because it has to be higher than last year.
But with inflation, there must be.
No, okay, so we're not
Not
necessarily.
when global interest rates are going up, people are less hesitant to hold commodities.
So it's not so much that I'm predicting significantly higher commodity prices in 2022. The increase, you're correct to say that it happened in the last 2 years. What's the increase that's going to come through this year is in production. So we're going to export significantly more platinum and gold. So the receipts are going to be higher, even if the prices remain. Yes, even if the prices remain flat. And the good thing about a consumable like oil, which in Zim we consume as diesel and petrol, is that when the price goes up, the demand isn't inelastic. People change their behavior in terms of how much they consume. So that tends to regulate itself to
I think
some extent.
That's a different argument in terms of production. I agree with your thesis, with the principle, but I disagree that it will happen in Zim on the simple principle. It will actually happen more in Zambia and in Mozambique.
Why?
Because they've actually been making the investment. So to increase production, and the rule of thumb is for every dollar that you invest, then in the next...
No, but we've made the investment.
Zimplus has done quite a bit of capex.
No, well, okay, that's small. And if you use that argument, he'll win. But the biggest investment we've made...
It's not about winning.
Okay. Oh, really? Did you just say that? But I think...
I'm not even a betting man. He's a betting
but
man.
The biggest investment we've made in mineral exports is getting all our young men to become korokozas. And production of gold is just going to keep going up because we've completely informalized and that stuff is all over the country.
I tend to agree with you, but how much more do you think we can get from korokoza? Last year we did 30 tons. The most we've ever done is 33 tons. What do you think this coming year?
Yeah, but we did 30 from what the previous year? From about 23?
Yeah, no, it was but it's not that the production increased. It's just that the production through the 4 more channels increased. Those korokozas were still korokozering
in 2020.
In 2020.
No,
it's just that what went through.
Okay, well, it becomes anecdotal.
Channels.
But you go into the rural areas and try and find a young man. They're not there.
Oh, is that what's underpinning the labor shortage that farmers are experiencing?
Yes. Yeah, the young men are not there. They are
a part of it. Yeah.
They are korokozering. And as long as we've got another 16-year-old to throw into a hole, the production is going to go up.
You're taking a lot of anecdotes in this and a lot of luxuries. Part of it is the government policy such that you're better off. So in gold production, what happens is if you're doing more than 5 tons a month, 5 kgs a month, you're termed large scale.
Producer.
And if you're a large scale producer, they take 60%. But if you're a small scale producer
of your US dollars,
if you're a small scale producer,
they don't take them; they just don't give you.
But if you're artisanal, you get all your US dollars.
You get all your US dollars. So it makes a lot of sense for somebody who was producing to then deem themselves artisanal than for them to be. So I don't want to speak too much into that, and I don't want to speak into consumption.
Fine.
But he raises an interesting point. I just don't think that the impact will be as big as you think.
But philosophically,
let's move on. We've got a few things to talk about.
I like his philosophy. Let's hear.
No, you guys are going down a rabbit hole. You can do this when I'm not here.
I think you'll find this quite interesting.
Okay.
Because I wasn't alive to this, and this idea that the bigger players get
penalized. Yeah.
They get to surrender 60%, and the smaller guys they get full value. Imagine if everybody got full value, what the investment landscape would be every year in the former mining sector.
Well, they've tried to do that with VFX now, and that's why all the big gold producers are going to VFX.
Well, they've failed.
His point is right across the board. If all exporters
and
what do you think the boost in production would?
VFX actually doesn't isn't a. I mean, look, I must qualify what I'm about to say by saying it's a positive development in terms of incremental investment in gold, right? Because you get rewarded for increasing production, but your installed capacity, you don't get any credit for that. That you still get penalized for every dollar that you bring in. So it's it's not a great solution.
Okay, fair enough. Moving on. Global inflation and our national debt. Is this not a good thing for us? I mean, we owe 20 billion. 7% wipes 1.4 billion off it.
No, so you're mixing two things. Just because there's inflation in the US doesn't mean there's inflation in the dollar. So the relationship between ourselves and the dollar is dependent on how much we are printing. So if we continuously are printing, then you will actually find that we will depreciate
our own currency
our
fast.
own currency. So what's
Faster.
happening? What's happening with the US in terms of inflation is just the imported inflation bit. But in terms of so you find, and that's usually his argument, is when you look at the dollar compared to all currencies, the dollar has actually been gaining, even though it's in a high inflation country. And the only reason is because all the other countries are printing more than the Fed is.
Yeah, but you're talking about it relative to the Zim dollar. And I think where his point comes into its own is if you look at it from the perspective of the fact that we are an exporter of commodities. So in US dollar terms, we get more US dollars for every gram of gold, every ounce of platinum, every kg of tobacco that we export. So if we, all things being equal, if the US dollar experiences inflation and commodity prices remain high, it means our capacity to pay off our debts is better.
We have a trade deficit. So when you look at our terms of trade, in terms of what we import and what we export, there's actually a deficit. We import more than we export. We then cover it using remittances.
But all things being equal, in a US dollar
If we have
inflationary
US dollar
world,
inflation-
it's easier to pay our debt than in a non-inflationary.
If you're exporting more.
So no,
All
if we're
things being
exporting, for every 1 unit that we export, we're better off if there's US dollar inflation.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah.
that's what we're saying.
Thank you.
But all I'm saying is you're just looking at the
One variable.
One variable. Because on the other side, it turns out you're importing more than you're exporting.
Yes, but we've always had that problem.
So then the impact will actually be more adverse.
Oh,
And
because
no,
okay, I get what
That's
I get his
all I'm
point.
saying, that the impact is actually
You
more
say
adverse.
okay, I get
Because
your
we
point.
actually import
Okay,
more.
but okay, fine. But what about this thing that Ministry of Agriculture says we've got 2.4 million hectares planted, crop is looking good. It's a good year. It's raining all
I
the
think
time.
we've pointed this out, that the only reason why the minister, and I'm going to be candid here.
He's my friend though. Eh?
Yeah, I'm going to be candid.
Well, was
to your
before he
friend.
was a minister.
Yeah, I'm going to be candid with you. The only reason why they put these grandiose numbers of 2.4 and whatever is because they want inputs. They want inputs to be funded. The output is just not there. So they will, go to town and shout about these numbers because what it means.
Dr.
what
Masuka,
it
I don't know this guy. He's
what
not my
it
friend.
translates to is a lot more inputs. And, we have a big problem. I mean, we had Eddie Cross, I think the producer is going to be angry with me. But Eddie Cross was on, one of the shows, and he highlighted that there's a big problem with Command Agriculture, even at CBZ. So this is not me. This is Eddie Cross, and he has
Oh, because he says it must be true.
well, he has the numbers because he has the numbers.
And the rest
right?
of us don't have access to numbers.
We have those numbers, right? But he has an insider view of what.
Didn't he leave or get fired? Or, anyway,
Yeah. So to me, I don't read too much into that number.
But look, I think
Only
those
problem
numbers,
I
we can
see-
take them at face value and we can still analyze them objectively. And so first, to start off, that 2.4 million hectares, it's less than the hectareage this time last year. Secondly, the rains were late, so that's going to have a negative, a headwind for this year's production. Thirdly, we've got this heavy rainfall that has capacity to do leaching, basically taking nutrients out of the soil. So that's also another headwind. So we can say with reasonably high conviction that this year's agricultural season is going to be less productive than last year's.
I think, personally, I think it's too early to call. But I think it's going to be determined by the next 2 or 3 weeks. Unfortunately, we're already beginning it hasn't been called a cyclone, but it's called a tropical depression that's hit us this week, and that's delivered buckets of water. If we get a couple more of those over the next 3 or 4 weeks, then I think your nightmare scenario or your doomsday scenario becomes real.
Doomsday. I said
Yeah.
less.
So
I didn't say it's a horror
if you
story.
if you wanted something positive, I can actually tell you something in terms of agriculture, something positive.
You can actually say positive things. You're capable of this.
No, what you will interpret as positive, to me, it's just data. It's
a
zeros
correction.
and ones.
It's a correction.
Zeros and ones.
Okay,
To me,
yeah,
as
let's
far as
have
I'm
it.
concerned. But in agriculture, what tends to happen is for you to have a good season. So ideally, if all things were equal, this year would actually be better agriculture season than last year.
Yes.
Why? Because a lot of our farmers get their seeds from previous year's seasons. So if you don't have seed, then you have a problem. You tend to have a bad, even though the rains are good, you tend to have not so great agriculture season. But if the rains are good and you have 2 consecutive seasons of good harvest, it means that the succeeding harvest will actually be higher than the preceding one. That's so on principle, this year is supposed to be better than last year.
Your conclusion is right, but as a farmer, I must just correct you. Your basis is wrong. Most farmers in this country don't get their seed from the previous year. They buy hybrid. But where your conclusion, why you're right, and we'll come to the same conclusion. It becomes true because if you have 2 successive seasons, you have capital. 2 successive good seasons, you have capital. But if you have bad seasons, you destroy capital.
I'm actually not talking about you, George Farmer. I'm talking about the small scale.
No, but
farmer.
even
subsistence farmer.
but even the subsistence farmer.
The subsistence farmer relies on the previous year.
No, but
this
even
is actually data.
Well, I don't believe your data because remember what? Guess what? They're eating sadza even as they're planting. So if they really needed seed from the Dura seed as we call it, they'll get some of the sadza, the maize seed they're gathering for sadza. But it's the fact that if you have 2 good seasons, last year you had surplus production, you sold it, you have money that you can put into another season. But if you have a drought, it destroys your capital. And the next season, you're going to have to start again at a smaller level.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I tend to agree with that assessment.
So
So
the
more
impact-
capital is going to be deployed in this season per
Ideally.
hectare
Should
or
have
per
been.
capita.
If you believe the 2.2 million tons,
Well, you don't have
2.7
to-
million tons of maize.
You don't have to believe the 2.7 million tons. You just have to accept for a
even
fact
if it was 1.4.
the reality that it was
Ideally,
much better
yes.
than 20
The previous year,
the
yes.
previous year,
So
yeah.
ideally this year, all things being equal, ideally you should have a better season.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be your 2.4, but maybe from 1.4.
Hey, we're 2.7, so now we must go to 3.5.
Well, that's so that's a tailwind for our economy. That's good.
Ideally.
So
But for all the
okay,
reasons that
can you imagine any? Okay, apart from the more depressions and cyclones, what other headwinds can you foresee? Because you're saying ideally,
terms of,
underlining
agriculture.
ideally, yeah.
No. I mean, the rains are problematic. Command
Labor.
agriculture, labor, all these other issues.
GMB itself and its own
Infrastructure,
financial health.
It's problematic.
An interesting thing, though.
Fertilizer, you need tons of fertilizer. I don't think that has come through as it usually does. You know, you've got these farmers who only 11% and 22% pay back their loans.
Don't point at me. I'm not, I didn't take a
So
look.
there's a lot of side marketing and a whole lot of other things that then make their ideal situation bad.
But also, having defended my erstwhile friend, who's now the minister, be
So
careful.
he's no longer your friend.
Well, I haven't talked to him for a couple of years.
Was he ever your friend?
We had a few of these together. Be careful how you read the 2.4 million hectares.
It's a number. It's 2.4 million. Is there
Can
a way
I explain
to read
why-
it where it's 3.5 or it becomes 2?
Well,
or
if
1.9?
we've got 2.4 million hectares planted, and we do a half decent job of growing grain, and we get 2 tons per hectare.
Yeah, that's impossible.
Yeah, but
Yes, this is wishful thinking.
okay.
All right. It's 1 ton.
All right. Let's say we get 1 ton.
Like 1 ton is like optimistic.
Yeah,
If we get 1 ton.
we're on
Average,
0.9.
yeah.
Okay. Let's say we get the 1 ton. That means there's 2.4 million tons coming. Last year we got 1.1 into GMB. Be careful how you read these numbers.
Yeah, I tend to agree with.
No. So what are you saying? Just unpack it.
I'm saying be careful how you read the numbers.
Okay, I'll tell you.
Yes,
the numbers.
thank you. I'm
the
the 6-year-old.
numbers are really about your input costs, your inputs.
Okay,
Right,
basically, what the two of you won't come out and say is the numbers are overly optimistic.
They're overly optimistic because what they want are inputs.
All right.
And you know how the numbers are built, right?
No.
Okay, we've advanced from Joseph Madi taking a plane and inspecting the thing. The numbers
I thought he just used his
It's
thumb.
self-reported.
they're actually built from Agritech's guys. And the Agritech's guys must justify their jobs. So there's an Agritech's guy who's responsible for a certain little corner of Zimbabwe. He's got his 50 villages or 100 villages. And he's got to do a report and show that he's been working. So he does a report that says there's so many farmers doing so many hectares in my area, so I must keep my job. It's not in his interest to say there's nobody in my area who's planted anything.
There's a perverse incentive there.
There is.
Yeah. So, okay, so maybe now I think the sky is falling.
No, it's not. Things are not. It's not doom and gloom. It's a correction.
What's in that black stuff that you're drinking?
It's activated charcoal.
Well, anyway, maybe it's time we go for another break. We'll see you in a couple of minutes. Welcome back. Before we went away, Tinashe was persistently saying the sky was falling. Rufaro is trying to convince us that
It's not.
it's not. It's
I don't
lovely and
use
sunny
such
out there.
language, anyway.
But Tinashe, Rufaro, inflation is 60%, eh?
In Zimbabwe.
The latest numbers,
Yep.
60%, 5.3 or
Almost
something.
6%
a month.
Month on month.
Is it that sunny? Is it that rosy?
No, it's bad. But that doesn't mean the sky is falling. I mean, nothing's changed significantly from an inflation perspective from January to December. We are effectively in a hyperinflationary environment. I think the conventional wisdom is that it doesn't make sense to sit on bank balances unless you absolutely have to, because they lose significant amount of value.
And what happens when they're forced on you? Like
Well, then
exporters?
there's a wealth transfer, isn't it? You lose value. So I don't think that narrative is going to change. I think the interesting
So the
question
sky is falling.
No. Look, we had 60% inflation last year. Did the sky fall?
I think a lot of people would say it did. A
So
lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of people lost their wealth, their homes.
Look, I think the more interesting question is, how long is the Zim dollar actually going to survive? Because if you actually look at government policy, especially some of the initiatives over the last 3 to 6 months, like allowing the public to access money at official rate, $50 a week, and making a commitment to pay civil servant allowances in hard currency. Basically, they're telling the markets that they don't have faith in the local currency, that they think the only real store of value is in US dollars. So the question is, how long is the Zim dollar going to remain with us? Is it going to survive 2022?
Wait, how did we get from talking about inflation to predictions of when the Zim dollar is going to die?
Well, the two are related, aren't they? Like if you have runaway inflation, right? What it means on an ongoing basis is that people's willingness to hold or accept Zim dollars declines, right? So if you have an option to not accept or deal with Zim dollars, you're more likely to choose that option. And more people are going to go in that direction until you get to a point like what happened in 2008, where no one wants to accept Zim dollars and we dollarize.
But you seem to be...
Maybe I can offer an alternative view. You're quite right. in terms of 2008, I think that, well, I hope that the politicians have learned one thing, and I think that's one thing that they've been avoiding continuously: empty stores. So I don't think that you will see empty stores. And given the two alternatives, it's either you continuously print, hyperinflationary printing, and then that will end up with empty stores, or you just tax the exporters even more.
Well, it's not the hyperinflation printing that empties the stores. It's price controls.
Well, if you go down that road,
Eventually, you get
you're gonna get
agreed.
empty stores.
But
then there's the
No,
alternative.
not necessarily. If
And then there's the alternative, which
you can have
is-
hyperinflation and full stores for as long as you don't have price controls.
We're saying it's inevitable.
That there'll be
Everywhere
price
else,
controls.
everywhere where you've seen hyperinflation, unless you're saying that Zimbabwe will be the unique case where you have hyperinflation and you won't have price controls and you won't have empty stores. Like, it's inevitable.
But
The minute you get into hyperinflation-
you guys are both ignoring the discussion you had a couple of weeks ago when I wasn't here with Timber. Probably because you guys were too busy arguing with a guest. You weren't listening to him. He thinks, and I thought he had good reason, to say the Zim dollar can't die because both business and the government need a certain amount of Zim dollar in circulation.
I'm saying that this time around, where it's unlike 2008, they'll balance the two.
So you agree with Timber?
No, I'm not saying I agree with Temba. I'm
You
actually
can
saying
say yes. It doesn't hurt.
No, I need to be very articulate and very clear on this. That they will balance the two. I don't think that they will get to 2008. And I'll prove me wrong. I don't think that where you're just printing. I think that what they will do is they're better off, and they've seen that they're actually better off just taxing the exporters. So you just take
It's
the
actually
US
quite good, by the
dollar.
way.
When
Yeah.
did you change?
I didn't change. I just added.
It's lovely.
You guys,
Thoroughly
what are you
enjoying
guys?
it.
Maybe I should just stop drinking whiskey because
Well,
I seem to be the one.
Well, you
who's in my
probably
own
need to
world.
join us. You probably
Because
need
you
to
guys
join
are-
us.
You can drink whiskey and tea at the same time. You know that. But
Can
anyway,
you
So-
carry on?
We've never had a dual currency scenario, and this is what we're saying. And I think that they will balance the two because they know the road where hyperinflation leads to, and they know that right now there's certain exporters who will not stop exporting, despite what's happening in the economy.
Because it's existential for them.
It's existential for them.
no, it's profitable.
No, it's
No, it's existential.
It's essential.
Because
If
remember,
you're
profitability-
Zimplats, if you stop exporting, what are you going to do?
No, but it's not
Exactly.
like Simplex is losing money, guys.
No, but
It's not existential.
So
it's
no,
profitable
it
for
is
them.
existential.
but
no, what
even
he's
if
saying
it
is
stops
true.
being profitable, it's existential.
It is existential for a lot of the big businesses. It is existential.
But the two are different, right?
Yes, they are.
And they're not there yet. Right now, they're exporting because it's profitable, not because it's existential.
Why do you keep shifting the goalposts? You're the one who took us into a speculation about the future. And now you're saying we're not talking about the future, we're talking about now.
What we're saying is, for a lot of those businesses, if government can tax them in US dollars, why wouldn't they? Because if you're printing, then it means that Zimplats gets to keep its US dollars, and then you need to pay them full price for those US dollars. Whereas you could print and pay Zimplats at a subsidized rate,
Which is what's happening.
which is what's happening. And that can sustain you for at least a longer period.
Yeah,
than
but
what
I
people
think, when
anticipate.
when we analyzed 2021 last year, one of the things that I found quite remarkable is that if you think about that 9.6 billion in hard currency receipts, right? You had $1 billion, which is a once-off windfall in SDRs. We had much better
1.4.
agricultural season, so we needed to import significantly less grain, and we had these
Remittances.
The remittances were
Right. and
better
yet,
captured in the system.
in spite of this very high level of hard currency receipts, we managed to debase the currency by almost 100%. We managed to print our way into 60% annual inflation, right? So from a hard currency receipts perspective, this year is going to be worse than last year because we don't have the SDRs. And
the borders are open, so
there's a whole bunch of
there'll be less money coming in and more goods coming.
there's a whole bunch of headwinds, right? And it's an election year. So do you think we're going to see less printing or more printing than last year?
More printing. But I think it's not going to be 2008. And here I'm just using logic that
You call it what it is, anecdote.
it's purely anecdotal.
And you do that sometimes.
And I'm just saying that it does not make sense to me for a politician to print 2008 when they know that eventually you're going to have empty stores and you want to win an election. It makes greater sense to me to find some idiot who will still export and you can just text them more in US dollars.
Please don't call them idiot.
Okay, sorry about that. They're not idiots. They're not idiots. They have an existential crisis.
Zimplats, if you'd like to advertise on the show, you're more than welcome. We do not think that you're idiots.
They have an existential crisis. So you find somebody with an existential crisis that they need to continuously export. They cannot stop exporting. And then you just text them more.
How is the teetotaler the only one who has foot-in-mouth disease? Amongst the
Don't
three of us.
know.
Like, how?
Mr. Producer, please take it. Anyway, so I mean, look, you guys disagree about the extent and the route, but do you think it's going to get worse?
Yeah, it'll get worse.
It will.
And this is
Unless you believe in
And
miracles.
touch wood, you know, like I said, to me, if they print to 2008 levels, that's like, why would you do that? You know, but if they do, then yeah, they would have proved me wrong. That logic is and rationality is something that we all share as human beings.
Okay, so why are we under this dark shadow?
It's not a dark shadow. I don't use such language. Such
Or this
phrases.
dark cloud.
But look, we saw them. We saw the Reserve Bank engage the business community. They held hands and sang Kumbaya.
No, you didn't read those resolutions very clearly, did you?
No.
Those
But
resolutions
look,
were
the point I want to make,
barbs
though,
at each other, eh?
the point I want to make is that you did have an engagement, right? Which you know, in the last decade, between in the last in the run up to 2008, in the last 5 years before that, basically you had a Reserve Bank that spoke down to the market. You know, they had all the answers. Everybody in the market was a criminal acting in malice, and they had the solutions and the remedies for all the problems. Whereas I think the current Reserve Bank has a completely different attitude, where they're willing to engage the business community and listen to their perspective.
And they've done it twice in the last few months.
And
so
they have.
But it seems like they keep ignoring what business is saying.
It's a start.
Well, I mean, look, it's not like they're going to make policy U-turns based on one engagement. But I think the fact that they...
But they're opening the door and they're telling the world that we're having these meetings and this is what business was concerned about.
But what business is concerned about is actually not coming out in the minutes.
No. You guys don't read, do you?
We do.
If
More
you,
than
read,
you do.
if you read that press statement, it's got two sections. And the first section, they're quite clear. And I think I wasn't in the meeting, but it seems to me like a good representation of what would have been said in such a meeting on the issues and problems. And then the second section is what's going to be
business said, and it wasn't there. Business did raise the issue of exporters, that exporters are being taxed.
It was there. Just read between
They
the
just
lines.
said it politely.
Just read
It's
between the
not that
lines.
they don't use your language.
No.
You know,
Well, they don't
that's
use
why they're
business.
allowed into the room.
Businesses actually said, this is what we said, and it's actually not there.
They don't know how to read between the lines.
Wow.
Look, but it's progress. I look at it as progress. I'm a glass half full kind of guy. So I think that's a positive. And that probably, ironically, underpins the point that Tinashe was making, that there's more likely to be a balance than a return to what we saw in 2008. And I think part of that balance is actually engaging with the
So why
market
is it
and finding
ironic?
out. Yeah. Well,
But actually, I've got a question for you and your
Well,
friends.
he needs to first explain why he's using such big words as ironic and he can't use them in the correct context.
Right? Whatever is in your tea. Muzi, you're not giving us gifts anymore. I don't know what you put in that tea. But I have a question for your friends who say, well, the governor's press statement doesn't capture what they said. Where's theirs?
Are they shy?
Very shy.
Why?
Well, we should ask them.
I mean, where's their press statement that
Yeah.
that says we had a meeting and this is what
This
we
is
discussed?
what we discussed. Yeah.
Because I mean,
No, I agree.
we have a meeting. I write my notes. You write your notes. We go away. I go by what's in my notes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that business has not, even the exporters, you said I shouldn't use words like,
Don't use it.
yeah, I'm not going to use it.
Yes,
But-
you're not allowed
but-
to use the I word.
Okay. Existential, those who are going through an existential crisis, I think that they need to get over it. Their existentialism, whatever, is causing that crisis. They need to get over it because it hurts the business. Because what it does is it's good for a big business like Delta, Zimplats, is that they can ride the waves. They can be doing this for the next decade and they'll still be around. But there's a small miner, a small junior miner who's barely making it and cannot afford this extra 20% to 25% tax, right? And yet the policy is being made by the big guys.
But where's he speaking? Where's his voice?
Isn't
It's
it a
being
leadership
drowned.
problem?
By
No,
who?
it's being drowned by the big guys.
Do you remember when we had? I almost promoted a particular business, but there was a few years ago when the junior miners had a very clear voice,
Okay, well, not
and
anymore.
it was out there. Where's it gone?
Not anymore.
Why aren't they speaking?
Because there's somebody who's still willing to export 800 million and they get taxed and they're okay with it.
Yeah, but no. But I think we're being a bit unfair here, Tinashe. We've got a governor at least, and I think to some extent a minister of finance and a minister of industry who have been open. They've opened the doors, and they've actually then come out and said, "We've met these guys, and this is our understanding of what they need." And you say, "Well, there's some small guys that weren't in the room." Fair enough, but what have the poor guys then done to have their voice heard? Shouldn't they also be coming out and saying, well, we weren't in the room, but if we had been asked, this is what we'd have said?
Well, the small guys just smuggle their products and they move on with that.
So they're criminals.
You can't use that word either.
Yeah.
I think we need,
They need rational
alcohol needs to come back on this show.
they need, okay, so this is the problem I have. The problem I have is if you are the Minister of Finance, and George, you articulated this beautifully 3-4 episodes ago.
Be careful, that compliment usually comes right before. It's
I
a
know.
Trojan horse.
I know.
No, it's not a Trojan horse at all. But he articulated something very, beautiful. And he says, look at it. For every dollar of export, if you lose 40%, what it tends to do is for every dollar of export, you're only getting 80 cents. So there's a 20% tax. 20% tax, that's a whole margin for a lot of producers. Now, if you put me in a room and you ask anyone whether they can survive and if it's viable to operate when there's a 20% tax, what do you expect them to say?
No.
Exactly. And if you continuously do it as a policymaker, what are you trying to tell me? Should I really get into a debate with you or an argument with you, or I'll just find alternatives?
No, you must get into a debate and an argument. I spend a lot of time in the village. And one thing that I've witnessed in village democracy, you've got the Sabu, right, who has got all this power, so we think. But when he
Is
calls
democracy the right word? But anyway, carry on.
I call it village democracy. I mean, you can find a better word of village governance. But when the Saboku makes a stupid decision and a meeting is called, everybody speaks with one voice. And when everybody speaks with one voice, he has to
I
listen.
think this is the difference between you and us. We believe in the markets. If you're a policymaker, you don't listen to what people say. You listen to what the market is saying. The market is telling you that it's unviable for you to be taxing exporters an extra 20% on top
Yeah,
of
but
their
that's
taxes.
utopian.
No, it's not utopian.
Because somebody has to educate me on this. So I'll sit there
It's not
wondering.
utopian.
I'll sit there wondering why this export has gone down or why that's happened.
so
somebody needs to educate me. If I'm
what
honest.
George is telling us is he should never be in power.
And I have no desire to be.
Because what you're telling us that it will still make sense to you to tax an exporter 20%.
No, but okay.
Over
Let
and
me
above
let me
what
bridge the
it
gap.
takes.
Let me bridge the gap. I think that we have seen with SI 127 that a policy can be enunciated that is bad for certain market participants, and if they engage and make enough noise, they'll be heard and there will be adjustments and reversals. And so I think because of that example and other examples, what's your downside risk? Putting people together, nominating a representative and saying, listen, engage. What's your downside risk?
The downside risk is you're engaging with competitors. So you've got Caledonia and you've got Rio Tinto. Two totally different minds.
They're not competing, by the way.
They're two different minds. Different.
They do gold.
Yeah. No. I mean, how do you compete if you're selling a product with a universal market?
They're competing for skills, supplies, and so on.
Come on,
But, okay,
let's just hear the point. The point is, these are two different
but the example,
minds.
the two that
Right?
you actually picked,
And you wanna put them in a room, and one is doom and gloom, and the other is
Glass half
full.
No, but the two
right?
that you actually picked,
And then you as a policymaker, who are you gonna go with?
no, but the two you actually picked
but
are a bad
let-
example of what you're saying because they're both in Chamber of Minds, and Chamber of Minds speaks with a united voice.
And just to actually look at those two examples, in the context of those two examples, that's what leadership is about, right? So we can be vicious competitors, the three of us, on a day-to-day basis, but on some issues we will
I just believe
agree,
in the
right?
market. I just believe in the market. We can agree on something, yeah, and we can agree that we're going to buy something. I believe more in the effective demand, what we eventually do, not what we talk about.
Yeah, okay.
And you know, Zimbabweans are nice people, by the way. They're not going to be in a room and be extremely cantankerous or.
So how are you, Zimbabwe?
Okay. Well, we need.
Who says I am?
Yeah, we never.
You talk to my mother. You talk to my mother.
I don't know what's in that tea, but no more for you. I'm taking this away. But thank you for coming along. Ignore this guy. We don't know him. I have no idea what he's drinking. It's been lovely having you along. It's been a lovely discussion. And as usual, we don't really know what we're talking about. We are probably wrong in our thoughts. But what we hope is this is inspiring you to think about something. It's inspiring you to talk to people around you. And if you have discussions with people of influence, raise some of these issues and see if we can make Zimbabwe a better country and a better place for you and I and for generations to come.
This is the part where you talk about COVID being real.
Thank you. Yeah, it's taken me a bit of a while to get used to being back on the source. Yes. Have a lovely weekend. COVID is real. Stay safe. Be good. If you can't be good at it.